Hidden texts in the Murdoch murders, crime, and corruption saga, a pivotal motions hearing ahead of a big stand your ground immunity case, and political chaos as the truth gets Epsteined. I'm Will Folks, the founding editor of FITSNews.com. Welcome to another edition of your Week in Review. Let's dive in. So we told you the Murdoch murders, crime, and corruption saga was back. And we told you it was back in a big way. And we haven't even gotten to the appeals, folks. That's going to be later this year when the appeal of Alec Murdaugh is eventually heard by the South Carolina Supreme Court. But before we get to the appeal, which our Jen Wood has covered in extensive detail, Jen did another piece this week, a big piece regarding the investigation into these homicides, the graphic homicides of Maggie and Paul Murdoch that, again, sparked a international story back in 2021 and culminating with the big trial of Alec Murdaugh in 2023. But Jen, you did a story this week about some text messages from Alec Murdaugh's phone that were not presented to jurors in this trial. And I got to be honest, Jen, when I was working with you on this piece and looking at some of these texts, one by one, you kind of look at them, it's like, And even after we published this, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, this maybe wasn't quite a big deal. But let me tell you, when people started blowing my phone up after you dropped this, it's a pretty big deal. So collectively, walk us through what you publish, why it matters.
Well, I think to me, these text messages that kind of came to the front of my mind after the indictment against Michael Colucci was quashed. And I was watching the hearing in that and listening to former now retired SLED agent David Owen discussing on the stand how he chooses to, include certain things in what he provides to prosecutors. And he said, I choose what I believe is important. And that is what he provides. And I thought to myself, I really should look at these text messages again and see what he chose, what he deemed important to put into that 88-page timeline.
Jim, before you do that, let's give folks a little context here. David Owen, of course, was the lead investigator in the Murdoch case. He was also the lead investigator in the Michael Colucci case, and it was his alleged failure, I guess we can call it a failure now, a judge has actually ruled, his failure to provide exculpatory information to Michael Colucci's attorneys, which resulted in the judge quashing that murder indictment and basically telling the state of South Carolina to start over. And this is a guy, Jen, you know very well. It's not just the Colucci case and this failure to disclose exculpatory evidence. It's not just the Murdoch case with this questionable blood spatter evidence that was touted ad nauseum prior to the trial, but then never even raised in the trial because it turned out it was fatally flawed. But it's also not these cases. We've covered extensively the death on the track story where, again, David Owen was the lead investigator in that murder investigation, and it went sideways, Jen. So this is a guy who has a history of issues when it comes to high-profile cases. But going back to these texts and what he chose to include and exclude for jurors in the Murdoch case.
The text messages that I found most interesting came from Eddie Smith, cousin Eddie, his co-conspirator, allegedly involved in the roadside shooting. And these text messages were not included, and they came in the days before the murders and the day after the murder. And these text messages were not included in the timeline. One text came June 3rd, which was 4 days before the murder, which was June 7th, 2021. And Eddie says, "Hey, brother, I need to come get the check. You got one with you, or are you going to be around?" And he says, "I've got to get these boys some more," which I think is really like, who are the boys? What's he getting more of? Clearly, there's money being exchanged. And, we know Eddie was running money allegedly between Alex and whoever he was getting the drugs from. Then in the day after the murder, so June 8th, 2021, Eddie texts him, "Tell me what you heard. What I heard is not true. Call me, please, at Fishing Hole." Um, Clearly, they are meeting up, and there's another phone number he's texting. It says it will not go through on my phone. So I'm wondering, is that a burner phone? Because, I've heard rumors that Alex had more than one phone that he was using. Were those files ever, did anybody ever try to find that phone, what the service was under, the records from that phone? So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some interesting things. I think without more context, we're not entirely sure what it means, but it was very interesting that it was not included in the timeline.
Yeah, and Curtis Eddie Smith, obviously, for those of you who remember this case, this was the guy everybody was coming to that trial to see. He was going to be, in the minds of many, a star witness for the state because he was, again, according to many who were familiar with his testimony, had he been called to the stand, was going to say that Alec Murdaugh confessed to him to murdering his wife and son. However, again, he was never called to the stand, and it's interesting, Jen. I gotta let me push back. I'll play devil's advocate here. If Curtis Eddie Smith, who was accused by defense attorneys prior to the trial of being involved in the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, they accused him directly of being involved. Why did they not call him?
That's a really good question. I made this very clear in the story that I wrote. I'm not saying that, the prosecution withheld these texts from the defense. It's
So
just
they
that
did
they,
provide all these texts to the
as
defense.
far as we know,
And did
and
they provide them to Curtis Eddie Smith's lawyer?
that's a good question. I mean, his case has not been adjudicated. So was that part of the package that they received? I have no clue, but the fact that it wasn't in the timeline, the prosecution wants to present the best case.
Mhm.
Um, but why didn't the defense fire back with it? I have a lot of questions, about it, and I wonder if Murdoch were to be granted a new trial, following this appeal, if some of these texts might make an appearance, if Eddie Smith might make an appearance in the new trial.
Yeah. And Jen, we've gone through this so many times with this guy and his proximity to the Murdoch family. He was rumored to be a family fixer, obvious connections to what appears to be money laundering. We're still not exactly sure what's going on with all these checks going back and forth. But certainly, he's a guy who is involved in the side of Alec Murdaugh's life that was not the publicly facing, front facing side. He was sort of this figure in the shadows. And I think a lot of folks during the trial, that was one of the reasons people wanted Cousin Eddie to be called to the stand, is because they wanted to know the truth behind his role, not only in that roadside shooting where, staged suicide, but also to address these allegations from Murdoch's attorneys that he may have been somehow connected to the actual murders. But we still don't know the answers to those questions. But Jen, your report, I got to tell you, it did an amazing job of just laying it all out. And like I told you, I was surprised. People really reacted to that piece. And I think that as this appeal moves forward, we're still waiting on the state to file their appeal. But you said there has been a notice that will be submitted. Is that correct?
Yes, yep, there was a notice filed with the Supreme Court that it will be submitted on time, if not before on time. So we are keeping an eye
Well,
out for that.
it won't be on time. They're way late. They've
Okay.
had incredible grace granted to them by the Supreme Court. But let me ask you this: stakes are very high for the state in that response because they have been presented with, we've said it on many shows in the past, a very credible appeal by Alec Murdaugh's attorneys. Not only that, they are in the unenviable position of having to be involved in a prosecution of the woman accused of jury tampering in this case. And again, they're not charging her for jury-related chicanery, which, frankly, I think is questionable that they're not doing that. But they are charging her on a perjury rap. Basically, how do you handle that? But so, with all that pressure, with all these different moving parts, how critical is this response from the state to Alec Murdaugh's appeal, and what do you think they have to do to meet that barrier of sort of restoring some balance here? Because right now, defense is running away with this in the appeals fight, Jen.
Yeah, they absolutely are. It's this. response is critical. It's very critical for the AG's office. And the appeal issues are beyond just the alleged jury tampering, jury rigging. It goes into evidence and what Circuit Court Judge Clifton Newman allowed the jury to hear. Prior bad acts, the financial crimes were presented to the jury. Data from the cell phone, the throwing guy, the
The guy that just tossed his
the
cell
phone
phone a
hucking
bunch of
guy spent
times,
an entire weekend.
and that's the evidence, yeah.
Right.
And that's
So,
critical to their timeline for the murders. I mean,
right.
that's
Right.
absolutely critical. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm anxious to see that response. I'm anxious to look at, where they go with it and how they prove their case. But it's going to come down to, how the Supreme Court justices interpret the current case law as it relates to the issues that they brought up.
So, Jen, I mean, do you think this is an investigatory problem or a prosecutorial problem?
Well, clearly there's issues with the investigation. There's a lot of issues with the investigation, and not just this investigation, other ones that we've looked at. But prosecutors do have, they need to do their due diligence when looking at what is provided to them by the investigators. You know, just because they put something in a timeline doesn't mean you should look at the whole package and make sure you're not missing anything. So, I mean, I think it's a mix. I think we need to do better, especially in cases that have stakes this high.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And again, we're dealing with people. Alec Murdaugh clearly lied at every step of the way, including during his double homicide trial. Michael Colucci's story about what happened to his wife strains credulity in my estimation. And in fact, that's why I think he did it. And again, obviously, he's innocent until proven guilty. And if Murdoch is granted a retrial, he will again be an accused killer, not a convicted killer as he is now. But so these things are important to keep in mind. But Jen, clearly we've got investigatory scrutiny now, and folks are starting to look at SLED a bit closer. And the other thing that I try to keep telling people as we focus on this is why it was so critical to separate them from this jury tampering, alleged jury rigging situation, because if you are invested in protecting a verdict as opposed to seeking justice, that's a problem. And I remain very concerned that the investigation into the jury tampering and alleged jury rigging has not been what it should be. And I think the way we know that is because there haven't been anybody charged for what is clearly tampering with that jury. But Jen, I want to switch gears now on another case and focus on another case that involves some of these same players from the Murdoch saga. It's a story that has been covered in detail by Valerie Borline of the Wall Street Journal, one of the key journalists in the Murdoch saga, wrote the definitive book on the Murdoch saga. But this is another story that she has sunk her teeth into out of South Carolina, out of Outre County, South Carolina. It is the September 2023 shooting death of Scott Spivey, a North Carolina insurance adjuster who was involved in a road confrontation that turned deadly just a few miles south of the North Carolina-South Carolina border back in the fall of 2023. Jen, there was a big court hearing this week related to this case. Now, this was not the actual stand your ground hearing, as the two defendants in this case, who have not been criminally charged, this is not a criminal case. We're dealing solely with a civil wrongful death action. Now, these two were never charged criminally, but the two individuals who shot and killed Scott Spivey on that roadside just south of the border, they are being sued civilly in a wrongful death action by attorney Mark Tinsley, obviously very familiar to our audience on the Murdoch saga. But the allegation there is that they did not have the ability to invoke that stand your ground protection that South Carolina law affords, and that they, in fact, according to Tinsley anyway, shot and killed this guy in cold blood without any provocation. So, Jen, let's walk through what happened in Lawrence, South Carolina, this week in the courtroom there in Lawrence as it relates to this case. How is this case setting up, and what do you see as the key arguments for both Mark Tinsley, who's advocating on behalf of Scott Spivey's family, and the defense attorneys in this case?
Right. So what's going to happen first in this case is they're going to have an immunity hearing. So what that means is under South Carolina law, the stand your ground law, Weldon Boyd and Kenneth Williams attorneys are seeking immunity for their actions, saying that it was self-defense, it was justifiable. And
civil immunity.
Yes, civil immunity, because those two totally separate things. So this hearing was part of motions that were filed by Weldon Boyd and Kenneth Williams attorneys to make some decisions ahead of going into this hearing. They were seeking a protective order to limit what information is disseminated to the media, stating that, this case is, there's been leaks to the media by the plaintiff attorneys and the plaintiffs themselves of information to try this case in the media. So that was one of the motions that was heard, and there was a motion regarding witness testimony. So Boyd and Williams attorneys they were saying that, when they present the information in court regarding the stand your ground hearing, that the witnesses' statements, like the 911 calls, all of that information, that should be enough, and they don't need to actually call these witnesses to testify in person. So that was another motion that was heard this week. And then there was a motion about getting independent testing done on Scott Spivey's, I believe
Follicle, right?
hair follicles,
Yeah.
correct. So they wanted to get that so that the defense could do their own independent testing. And it sounds like they're specifically looking for evidence of steroids, past steroid use in that hair follicle testing. So that is primarily what we were there for. So the protective order that the defense filed, Judge Griffith, who was assigned to this by the South Carolina Supreme Court, granted that protective order. He said, we can't stop what has already been released. We can't put that back in the can. But going forward, definitely going to be a protective order.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was an interesting move, and probably a good move, because it sounds like the defense is having a hard time connecting with the witnesses now. Their names have come out in the media. They've gone radio silent. So hopefully that does help with that. He did say that there has to be in-person testimony. So they are going to have to get these witnesses subpoenaed. A lot of them are out of state, bring them in to take the stand.
And how did he rule on the hair follicle, Jen? Did he permit?
He did not rule on that yet.
Okay.
The language that he used made me think that perhaps he was leaning towards it, but you never know.
Right.
But yeah, so it was definitely an interesting hearing. Tinsley argued that, he feels that providing information to the media is important because of the corruption that has come to light in the aftermath with the Horry County Police Department.
Which is indisputable. I mean, there's an active criminal investigation into that agency.
Right.
Two people at that agency are no longer there. One resigning when confronted with allegations of misconduct. Another terminated. So, I mean, that is a fair point, I would argue.
Yeah, I agree. But I think when it came down to it, the judge, agreed with the defense in that this case cannot be tried in the media. They've got to be able to get those witnesses to come in. They've got to be able to present the facts to the court without the media doing it ahead of time.
And Jen, I want to ask this, because all of this boils down to what happened. Mm-hmm. What happened? And we know, obviously, that there was an investigation into this that was badly flawed, and that's putting it charitably. This was a guy who obviously had connections with these cops, so there are, in my mind anyway, clear and compelling points of documentation which prove that this investigation was, at the very least, not on the up and up, and perhaps exactly what Attorney Tinsley suggests is, which is corrupt. But setting that aside, what actually happened still, I mean, particularly if we are going to try to ease back into the criminal realm, which I think is the whole point of this thing, try to get that criminal case reopened, you got to have proof that what he says happened is what actually happened. And from what we've published, again, the witnesses, the 911 calls, we still have, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I want to be deferential here. We have not played team sport with this one. We've been down the middle, even though, some would say we may have a motivation to play team sport with this one, but we've been down the middle because, I mean, look, the truth is going to be what it's going to be. But you have these guys in the lead up to the incident kind of chasing this guy down a highway, which to me, just back off. Don't chase the guy down the highway, number one. And then in the aftermath, you've got this at least incompetent or at worst corrupt investigation. But what happened before and what happened after, we still got to deal with what happened at the moment. And what these witnesses are saying, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, is that a guy comes out of a car or comes out of the truck with the gun.
Right.
A gun drawn. And at that point,
I mean, okay, so we're
you're going to get shot.
We're looking at what we have published, and everybody's like, they chased him down. Well, they were driving up that road, heading towards his home. You hear the witnesses saying, he's going around them. Scott Spivey, he's going around this car. He's waving a gun out the window. He's brake checking them, slamming on the brakes. Almost ran him off the road at one point. I think at one point when they did turn off onto Camp Swamp Road, they turned right onto Camp Swamp Road.
But Jen, somebody waving a gun at you runs you off the road. Call 911. Don't.
They did call 911. I don't know. I
don't know.
I don't know. I agree. There's a lot of things a lot of factors I think play into this. I am trying to stay very open-minded about it because you never know what's going to come out. But when you look at the corruption in Horry County and the investigation, yeah, there are a lot of questions. But just because the investigation was screwed up, the department is corrupt, does it mean that the end result was incorrect? I mean,
right.
Two things can be true at once.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it wasn't Horry County's decision. It was the South Carolina Attorney General's office, Heather Weiss, who decided not to pursue the criminal charges. And I don't think, based on what I've seen so far in this civil case, and again, we don't know everything yet. Obviously, we're heading toward a very important hearing regarding this case. I haven't seen anything yet that would indicate that decision is going to be reversed. Have you?
No, not yet. There's been no indication from Attorney General's office that it will be. But again, depending on what comes out in this hearing, that anything could change. I mean, you just got to be prepared for anything at this point.
Well, this one has been just a wild ride, pardon the terrible pun there, but it has been a story that has really taken off. Most of that, I think, attributable to the Wall Street Journal coverage. There have been 3 articles in the Wall Street Journal on this story by Valerie Boron, including one big front page splash that apparently did a ton of business for the Wall Street Journal. So it's certainly a case that is attracting some significant attention. But Jen, as it moves forward, we will obviously continue to track these motions. You and Kelly Lyons have done amazing work sort of sifting through these motions, bringing the core arguments to our audience. And we were obviously there on site with cameras as that hearing was held. And we will continue to track this case as it moves toward that pivotal immunity hearing that you referenced on South Carolina Stand Your Ground. But I do want to take this opportunity to point out, Jen, the one thing that impressed me the most about your coverage. There's a lot of personalities in this business. There's a lot of people who pick sides with really no reason to pick sides. A lot of people who try to turn this journalistic endeavor into a vanity project or whatever you want to call it. But the thing I got to say about your work and Callie's work on this story, you guys have followed the facts. You have followed the filings. You have fairly laid it all out for our audience to let them see. And I got to tell you, that is one of the things I am proudest of here at FITSNews, the way that we approach these cases, the way that we do business. Again, without fear or favor, you have epitomized that in your coverage of this case. And again, we've done it in a situation where, some folks in this story covering it and integrally involved in it, a little bit hostile to us. But again, I think that's a testament to the way we do things, that we do not let that cloud our coverage of these cases. We follow the facts wherever they lead. So Jen, you've done that. Hats off to you for it.
Thank you.
So last week, U.S. President Donald Trump was riding high with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill. We talked about that extensively on the show. Dylan Nolan, our producer, director of special projects. I want to talk to you about the highs and lows of this second term of Donald Trump. Obviously, I said my piece about this bill. I don't like the Big Beautiful Bill. I think it's a betrayal of all the fiscal promises.
Too big, not beautiful enough.
Yeah, and more importantly, it's just not what the guy said he was going to do when he started this whole populist revolt against the GOP, against the swamp. It's not what he said he was going to do. So that's my beef with the bill. But anyway, big victory for him nonetheless. Was riding high last week. This week, not so much. In fact, I think we could argue this was probably the worst week of the second term of President Donald Trump, because even some of his hardened supporters, Dylan, really turning against him in the aftermath of this release from his Justice Department and FBI regarding pedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein. Dylan, just give us 30,000-foot view. I know most people have been following this, but walk us through what happened here.
Last weekend, Axios released a memo which came from inside of Trump's Department of Justice, run by Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. She's now the United States Attorney General. But this memo said basically nothing to see here, Jeffrey Epstein. There were no clients. There will be no further releases indicating who these clients were. There won't be prosecutions. Complete cleanup operation.
And no files will be released. And of course, the argument there is that this is all child porn's CSAM material.
Which is an argument that makes absolutely no sense, because obviously nobody's going to expect them to release, the actual evidence. But what people would expect is when you've got Ghislaine Maxwell, his procurer, sitting in prison for 20 years for trafficking, for perhaps some of the people to whom the children were being trafficked to go to prison. Nobody actually wants to see the evidence. So yeah, the memo was bizarre in that it spent a lot of ink talking about how they're not going to release child pornography. Like, of course you're not. Nobody ever expected them to do that.
Yeah, and you wrote a great article on FITSNews about how the truth surrounding Jeffrey Epstein may have just been Epsteined.
Yes.
And so I want to ask you a little bit about in your coverage of this, as you kind of look at this. I mean, obviously, there's skepticism from all corners. Trump was a drain the swamp guy, taking on the deep state. Now, Dylan, it looks like the tables have turned. What's behind this cover-up?
Blackmail. I mean, blackmail operations are undergird the United States political system. They undergird the highest levels of finance, the banking world, the technology world. And they're not...
So the president of the United States is being blackmailed, is what you're saying?
No, he may be being blackmailed, but he also might have the keys to the kingdom there and not want to pull the whole house down, because if you start, pulling these Jenga blocks, these are big league people. We're talking about Bill Gates. We're talking about Prince Andrew. This would cause massive problems if you begin prosecuting these people. So it appears that he's, what blackmail operations, what deep state, what swamp.
So here's the question I have for you, and I guess it goes to strategy, politics. If that's where you end up, if not wanting to bring the Jenga down is where you end up, why come out so hard in the first place and say, yes, we're going to release it? Why do you have your attorney general say, yes, it's on my desk, it's going to be released? Why make such a play about transparency if you're ultimately going to end up not being transparent?
Well, when you're talking about election cycle, nobody wants a government that's run by a bunch of, pedophile blackmail ring operators. Okay, then you win office. You're in your second term. You don't have to worry about winning office again. you now want to control all of these people who you have the blackmail material on.
So it's a control play by him.
Well, yeah, what else is the point of blackmail? I have video of you doing things that you don't want me to release, things that would end your, life, result in you being in prison for the rest of your life. You now have to do whatever I say. That's the whole reason that they run blackmail operations.
So Trump is not the blackmailee, he's the blackmailer.
We don't know. But what, it's either this will cause such a bleep show if I start pulling down the house of cards, and or it will just result in my assassination because these people are all so wealthy, powerful, connected. These operations are being run by our own intelligence community, which is behind the scenes, works with the British intelligence community, the Israeli intelligence community. They're kind of one hive mind. But if you're a guy like Trump and you start tipping that apple cart, they will kill you.
Yeah.
They will kill you stone dead. They'll take you for a convertible ride in Dallas, and that will be the end of it. They'll take you for a speech in Butler and, mysteriously not secure the roof across from the stage.
Yeah.
So he might have done the calculus that it's not worth having my head blown off. But either way, he's getting blown away in the polls because this is disgusting to many people.
Yeah. And whatever the motivation, whether it's him trying to protect himself.
For him to run the ring, for him to not get his head blown off, we don't really know what it is, but this is some nefarious, dark stuff.
And there's the Israeli tie too. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this.
Oh, yeah.
This is there's
for folks who aren't aware, Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who's been convicted, doing 20 years. Her father, Robert Maxwell, was a very well documented agent of the Israeli government, running guns in the 80s. He was the one who got Epstein into this world. And he mysteriously died in the 90s after he fell off the back of his yacht. Again, another guy who met an Epstein-like end. But there are well-documented ties between the intelligence community. Also, it should be known that Epstein was a money launderer. That was a lot of what he was doing when he wasn't doing these blackmail operations. This is well-documented. But he was not doing all this stuff for fun. And there was no way that he funded his lifestyle without a significant outside source of cash, because there's no clear record of how he made the billions of dollars, which he would have needed to live the lifestyle he lived, without some sort of external pool of cash to draw from. So this guy was involved at the highest levels in intelligence. This is something that is not really disputed by people who have been studying this for decades. I mean, there's journalists. You look at Vicky Ward. She's broken this stuff down very well, if you want to read her coverage. But we now are at the point where the United States government, even with all this evidence which exists, is saying nothing to see here.
Well, I want to come back to the Israeli component of it, because there's some things I want to talk to you about that. But first, I want to go to this clip. This was from the cabinet room of the White House in the aftermath of this farcical release. And this is the President of the United States. It was actually a question for the AG. President jumps in to answer it. Let's take a quick listen to this.
Your memo and release yesterday on Jeffrey Epstein, it left some lingering mysteries. One of the biggest ones is whether he ever worked for a American or foreign intelligence agency. The former Labor Secretary, who was Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Costa, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night?
Yeah, sure. If
Could I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure. First, to back up on that, in February, I did an interview on Fox, and it's been getting a lot of attention because I said, I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file along with the JFK, MLK files as well. That's what I meant by that. Also, to the tens of thousands of video, they turned out to be child porn downloaded by that disgusting Jeffrey Epstein. Child porn is what they were. Never going to be released, never going to see the light of day. To him being an agent, I have no knowledge about that. We can get back to you on that. And the minute missing from the video, we released the video showing definitively the video was not conclusive, but the evidence prior to it was showing he committed suicide. And what was on that, there was a minute that was off the counter. And what we learned from Bureau of Prisons was every year, every night, they redo that video. It's old, from like 1999. So every night the video is reset, and every night should have the same minute missing. So we're looking for that video to release that as well, showing that a minute is missing every night. And that's it on Epstein.
I mean, have we become a comedy show here in the White House? I mean, is this a joke? And if so, who's the joke on?
The joke's on us, the regular people who are, not at all involved in the benefits of this scheme of running the world. But it's interesting. You spoke about how Bondi went out there at the beginning of the administration and was hyping people up. I think this goes, if you're one of these people on the list, you now see how much of clowns they are willing to make of themselves to protect the people who are implicated in the blackmail material. I think that there's something to the self-flagellation of Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, these people who were made out to be the great destroyers of the deep state.
These were the people who literally the left fought tooth and nail against, in the belief that they were going to.
This is not a left-right issue. I mean, they've got, maybe even some senators in this state on tapes doing all sorts of things, and that's regardless of political party.
Mm. Well, let's talk a little bit about political party, because this entire dust-up has led to a renewal of the feud between the world's most powerful man, Donald Trump, and the world's richest man, Elon Musk. Now, these two were simpatico during the 2024 presidential election. The first few months of Trump 2.0, they were on the same team, driving some long overdue scrutiny of the federal behemoth. Now that scrutiny has gone away. The cuts that it identified, not included in Trump's bill, I think $9 billion or something Trump has signaled out from Doge cuts that he wants to enact, which is a joke. I mean, when you're looking at the trillions of dollars of waste in this government. But Dylan, Elon Musk has come out, said he is starting a new party. He is going to challenge select senators and representatives who are supportive of Trump. So we now have an entire new paradigm here to work with. We've been talking for a long time, this two-party state, both of them basically doing the same thing in Washington, D.C., which is spending money we don't have and racking up unsustainable debt and interest payments on the debt that are now approaching a point of
going to parties with financiers, which is how they get them to vote yes on all these things.
Correct. But now we have Musk coming into this equation, and folks who are not familiar with FITSNews, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, of particularly what he's done with free speech on X. Although I think X had kind of a bad week this past
At least their AI department went off the rails this week.
What happened there? Tell us a little bit about that.
So, for folks that don't know the AI market very well, you've got OpenAI, that's ChatGPT. Google is a major player, and XAI is rapidly growing their operations, spending billions of dollars to build these massive server farms so that they can train Grok, which is their model. Mm-hmm. And they are going to release Grok 4. They actually just did at the end of this week when we're recording this show.
This is an AI platform.
Right. AI. It's like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever.
Explain it to a boomer, though.
Sure. You can ask it questions and it responds like a person.
Gotcha.
Now, the problem was in the later hours of Grok 3.5, I believe, it went full Nazi mode, extremely anti-Semitic.
Really?
And it seemed to be running away from the creators, its own programmers. It was indicating in responses that they were on the back end, trying to get it to stop doing this. And it was still saying this. And now I like AI. I read a lot about it. So I have seen, multiple case studies of this kind of stuff happening where researchers have models which they're kind of contained in a lab setting, and then they'll run away and start going crazy and doing things that the researchers don't want it to do. But this is the first time where we've really seen one completely run away publicly in one that's actually openly being used at the time. And
Wow.
this is kind of a glimpse into how crazy the AI-driven future could get, because it took like, I mean, over the matter of a couple of hours, it went from like a little, whoa, that's not politically correct, to full on like praising Adolf Hitler.
Jesus. This is Grok, the
It was referring to itself as Mecha Hitler.
so we've got like a real life HAL situation from
Yes,
the
it was
Space Odyssey.
yeah, for the 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's this like very intelligent computer which is central to the plot, and at one point they're removing the physical, disks which are the memory for this computer, and
But
it
instead
felt
of
as though they
opening
had to do this for Grok.
Instead of opening and closing doors, we've got it spewing anti-Semitic invective. Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Well, I wonder because, one of the things the Trump stance now with Israel, obviously all this happening, by the way, it's important to mention during a state visit
Of the Prime Minister of Israel,
the
Bibi
Prime Minister.
Netanyahu.
Indeed. So all this is happening at a pivotal time. But one of the things that I've always found troubling, and when we try to talk about these issues, and this is why when I said I wanted to come back to Israel, anti-Semitism. I mean, you look at it and what this AI runaway situation. I mean, it pisses people off, and rightfully so. I mean, it's discriminatory. It
was just vile.
Yeah, but here's the problem I have though is that we've gotten to a point, I think, in the American political discourse where we can't have discussions about things like the Epstein list or things like continued subsidization of the Israeli military effort. We can't have those discussions without people saying, oh, you're anti-Semitic or oh, you're...
But who cares? I mean, at a certain point, I think in 2020, this is really what was a major problem for the left, was if you call everybody racist, if you call everybody anti-Semitic, there's now a large group of people that's, okay, no matter what I say, I'm going to be called X-ist term. I don't know that it carries the same weight that it did back in the traditional media era where you could just, oh, this guy's racist, anti-Semitic, boom, he's gone, you never see or hear from him again. You've got these platforms like TikTok, like X, and you notice these are the ones that are getting absolutely hammered by regulators. They're you look at X in Europe, they're rapidly trying to shut that down. TikTok, they're trying to shut it down here.
Mm-hmm.
But there are at least other modes of communication, or even a website like you own this website. Like nobody's gonna, short of your DNS host withdrawing your, hosting of the website, you're gonna be able to say what you want to say.
Yeah. One, I think the one thing I want to say on this is if you look at the history of the relationship between America and Israel, go back to the Clinton administration. Netanyahu gives a big speech before the U.S. Congress saying that Israel's reached childhood's end, that they don't need America's help propping them up anymore. You get to the Obama administration, where we're continuing to prop Israel up, and Netanyahu tells Obama directly, never second guess me again. I mean, this guy's been given the marching orders in the Oval Office for a long time, and it seems like here we are once again. And whether it's this Epstein drama on the home front or some of the foreign policy entanglements and expenditures that it obligates us on the international front, I guess what is the point of what are we getting out of this relationship?
I don't know. They don't have me on video doing anything, so I don't know that I see it. I don't know. I see the same about it.
Got to get Lindsey Graham.
No, but
in here.
I mean, seriously, like, I think there's a great case to be made for them as an ally in the Middle East, as far as somebody that we can rely on to stabilize that region. But I take your point completely that we need to be able to have honest dialogues, open dialogues about the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of the relationships that we have in our foreign policy. And it does not feel like we're able to have that.
Yeah. And to be clear, and you hate that you have to accompany conversations like this with the caveat, because it should be unspoken. It should be, I mean, this is obviously not in any way, shape, or form, an endorsement of the other side of this battle, the virulent pro-Palestinian side that has targeted a lot of Jewish folks with specific violence. I mean, I guess my point is, no matter what side you fall on, why is it our fight? And why are we continuing to shell out billions and billions of dollars, in effect, subsidizing both sides of the fight? It just doesn't make sense to me. But
yeah, I mean, and that's your foreign policy view. I think that in the era of America operating as a global hegemon, especially coming, we were the ones who developed atomic weapons, and I think that there was a massive responsibility once we entered that era. The foreign policy idea that you can kind of use our grand oceans and beautiful mountains and, just we have the best geographic situation on Earth for any nation, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But in the era of intercontinental ballistic missiles, that doesn't get you very far. So I think that we need to, we don't want to be the world police. We don't want to be the ones who are solving everyone's problems. But also, as you point out, there's some crazy stuff going on in the Middle East. And it would behoove us to make sure that there aren't folks who can fire ICBMs at us there. So, or anywhere else in the world. So I think that us having a global footprint is a thing that in the atomic age, realistically, we need to maintain. Now, that being said, as I just said, we need to have open, free conversations where people can say, I think we need to have a stable Middle East, but also I don't think we should have blackmail undergird that, especially if it's going to involve children.
Yeah.
I mean, keep your blackmail to stuff that is not just so morally reprehensible that it makes you want to pull your eyes out. It's so awful, the stuff that we know they did with Epstein and that they're now currently covering up.
Yeah. And we've covered those kind of scandals here in South Carolina as well. It's horrific stuff. But Dylan, obviously, as this Musk component continues to unfold, there's that political dynamic we've got to track, but also just this broader assessment of Trump from his MAGA base. Where does he go from here after this? And so that's certainly...
Well, what does that mean for the midterms? And what does that mean for 2028?
Yeah.
And there's still so much time between now and then. Like a week is like a year in politics sometimes. Who knows what will happen between now and then. But J.D. Vance has been awful silent this week. And that's smart because there's clips of him. He went on Theo Von, the comedian's show, prior to the election. And Theo's a guy that, likes to raise questions like the ones you were just asking. And on that show, JD was talking about, we really need to release the Epstein list. It's just ridiculous that we haven't done that. Like, they will rub his face in that, and they should.
Yeah.
They should. Everybody who wants to run for office, they should ask them, what are you going to do about this?
Well,
This issue is not gone.
They've got Vance in Pennsylvania this week promoting the president's bill and the broader economic agenda. We'll see if he gets some tough questions about that. But more importantly, if he comes to this studio here in South Carolina ahead of that first in the South presidential primary, closer than you think, folks. In fact, we've had a flood of Democrats coming into South Carolina, Dylan, as the first in the nation presidential primary for the Democrats starts ramping up. What are you seeing in these Democrats trying to plant their flag here in the Palmetto State?
Yeah, Gavin Newsom was here. He was sparring on social media with multiple of the state's top Republican gubernatorial candidates. I saw a couple of Democrats who attended who were putting stuff on social media up after basically indicating that the message was too progressive for their taste or what they believe that the taste of South Carolina is. Mm-hmm. I think that these events are not necessarily reflective of what the message will be come primary season or even come main election cycle. I think the Democrat Party is doing a lot of soul searching right now, trying to figure out if they're going to try to go for a steady the ship approach and run kind of somebody who's on the centrist lines, back off of some of their more radical positions on issues which are extremely unpopular, like transgender, like the border. Mm-hmm. Right now, they're getting clobbered on those issues because they pull in the Republicans' favor 80-20, but they could potentially run a moderate. The other route they're exploring is to go the exact opposite and run an extreme progressive. We're seeing up in New York that this obviously has legs, but that's an area that is a Democratic stronghold. So I think it would be unwise to not seriously message test that with middle of the road people politically before you go all in on that if you're a Democrat. I think they'll be able to flip a lot of House seats, a lot of Senate district, or maybe even a couple Senate seats, I should say, to progressives in these areas that are very deep blue. But I think they're going to be dipping their toes in the water as they do these national events across states like South Carolina to figure out whether this progressive narrative will sell to a broader electorate than just deep blue voters.
Yeah, and folks, that's why what happens here matters. Again, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, or whether you're looking at this new party from Elon Musk or just sick of all of them.
And by the way, let's talk about this new party with Elon Musk. We kind of got derailed by X going Hitler mode, but the interesting thing is he said he's not going for the presidential election in 2028. He wants to flip 2 to 8 Senate seats is what's been reported on Politico. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows that that's pretty reasonable. If you look at Ross Perot, he was the last, serious third-party candidate who would run an America Party style ticket, and he just handed the White House to a Democrat. It was very counterproductive. His campaign, he stepped away from it for 10 weeks and still won, 17% of the vote or something like
first
that.
time.
Yeah, so... But
Second time didn't go so well.
Yeah, well, people saw what happens with third parties. But it shows me that this is not some sort of fool's quest here. He's actually serious about gaining some leverage.
What about Rand Paul as the nominee for president for Elon Musk's political party?
I don't think that goes much better than Ross Perot. I mean, maybe he can get more points, but I think you just hand the Democrat the White House because you're going to be splitting the Republican base, and it's just clear what would happen. But the fact that he's going for the House seats and the Senate seats means that if he can do this successfully, and I think that if he employs the right people, gets the right candidates, picks the right seats, this is something which is possible. This could give Elon what he wants, which is leverage to actually have a seat at the table when it comes to putting these bills together.
So do you buy Trump's pushback that this whole thing is that Elon's just mad that we took away his subsidies? Do you think it's that, or do you think Musk has a genuine ideological bent here that he's attempting to gain that leverage to advance?
Well, Elon said years before this was an issue that he didn't want the subsidies for his own automaker because he believed that the Tesla subsidies were helping the competitors a lot more than they were helping Tesla because their cost models were not as reliant on them than, say, Chevy or Nissan. However, I think he was very upset about the broader green energy subsidies for adding backup batteries, all across the power grid, which is what is necessary to go to a clean energy grid. Elon, writ large, is a big believer in green energy, and I think he was very upset, not necessarily about losing the subsidies for Tesla's vehicles, but for the broader multi-billion-dollar slashing of green energy subsidizations writ large.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. Certainly, Elon Musk's party could play in South Carolina. I mean, it's a heavily pro-Trump state, but again, if Trump continues with these brain-dead moves at the national level and here in South Carolina, the more he aggressively asserts himself for Lindsey Graham, a hated politician in the Republican primary. We've been talking about this for a little while now, Dylan, this trend of does Trump damage himself by aggressively supporting Lindsey Graham, which, as you can see, he's continuing to do. They're out on the golf course again, buddying up on the golf course. And
a theme that we've talked about in multiple episodes is how heavy will Trump support Lindsey Graham?
Looks pretty heavy.
Well, we talked last week about how one of his two campaign managers now is on Team Graham. You're now seeing Trump mugging with Graham. You're seeing Lindsey Graham's boy Netanyahu visiting the White House. You're seeing the Epstein blackmail ring getting wrapped up. It appears that Trump is going full neocon.
And that's a huge disappointment for those who have truly advanced.
A huge part of his base. And we should talk about Mike Rasmussen. I think most pollsters are not worth a damn. But this guy's results over the last couple of years have been really good. And I follow him on X. He does daily. They're polling every single day. And Trump's popularity here it's declining. It's kind of mirroring what it did when the stock market took a dive after Liberation Day. His post-Liberation Day approval rating went back up as the stock market returned. I don't know that these folks, if they are indeed getting mad about Epstein, I mean, how do you make that right with those people?
Yeah. Well,
other than putting some people in prison, but it seems pretty clear that they don't want to do that.
Yeah, they'd rather leverage. Well, when you promise, forget just the release of the Epstein client list. When you promise America first foreign policy, and when you promise, fiscal conservatism and responsibility here. And again, I know you pointed out.
And they also pissed off the immigration people this week. There's a big portion of Trump's base which are immigration focused. They want Americans to be able to make the highest wages possible, and they believe that having millions of people who are able to compete for less, work for less, is not good for that. And Trump's agriculture secretary, Brooke Rollins, is pushing this, the hotel industry, the agriculture industry. They want amnesty for their people. They want ICE to leave them alone and
focus on the
for them to
criminals.
have a path to citizenship, or at the very least for them to not be deported. And this is, and they've been pushing for this for years. If you look 2015, every single person on that stage besides Trump, was already on board with a pretty serious amnesty program because these, very wealthy lobbies, that's what they want. And Trump is inching towards, we'll see how much Rollins is able to get here. But the fact that she's even on the cabinet is telling. So he's pissed off by putting amnesty on the table. He's really pissed off that part of his base as well. So you got the finance people are mad about the big beautiful bill. The drain the swamp people are mad about the Epstein cover up. The immigration people are mad about him playing footsies with big business and giving them their indentured servants. Yeah. That's a lot of parts of the MAGA base which are being eroded. And I think that is a great thing for a guy like Elon who might hope to peel some of these people off into his nascent party. Although if the reports are true, I don't think he's going to go for mass appeal. I think he's going to go in there with a surgical scalpel, pick a couple of seats, and see if he can't win them.
Well, the first time Trump and Musk sparred publicly, every Republican South Carolina and politician tripping over themselves to show their support for Trump against Musk. We'll have to see how that dynamic plays out now that Trump beginning to alienate, as you said, broad swaths of that
I think
MAGA
that
base.
If you're in politics, crossing Trump is still a death wish at this point. We've seen what could end up being an absolute blip in the radar as far as a drop in support. If this is persistent over the next couple of months, then maybe people will stick their necks out. But as it stands, Trump is clearly in control of the Republican Party, and I don't think anybody's going to cross him without thinking twice about it.
Yeah, and yet clearly contravening pretty much everything that established him as the populist hero to this space. So that to me is kind of the big disappointment in all of this is, again, it's not one thing or the other. It's just this, the guy who was going to drain the swamp has become the swamp, and that's disappointing. But Dylan, obviously South Carolina State is going to factor prominently in so many of these fronts. We hope, maybe we'll see the America Party establish a presence here. I mean, why not? This is a pivotal state. They should be here. They should play. Certainly, we look forward to tracking the emergence of that party here in the South primary state. But Dylan, once again, man, tons of stuff happening at the national stage. We'll get back into some state stuff this coming week. We got some big announcements this coming week at the state level. Lieutenant Governor Pam Yvette will be announcing her gubernatorial candidacy. She's the one who promised a Trump endorsement early in the process. Not so sure if that's still on the table, but we'll be tracking that. But again, for all of those critical First in the South stories, FITSNews has got you covered. We will continue to keep tabs on their impact on national politics so that you can make sure you're aware of everything that's going to impact the national debate in the years to come. All right, folks, that is a wrap for this week's edition of Your Week in Review. Once again, Will Folks, owner, founding editor of FITSNews.com, thank you again for all of your support, which empowers everything that we do here. If you're not already a FITS supporter, please consider becoming one today. We'll catch you next week on Your Week in Review.